This morning, IMPD is investigating after a shooting that left a mother dead on Indy's south side.
IMPD says they were called just before midnight to a home on Turtle Creek North Drive after reports of multiple shots fired. When officers got there, they found a woman who'd been shot and killed. At the time of the shooting, a 2-year-old child was inside the home unharmed.
11:54 p.m., November 24th, 2025. Indianapolis police officers push open the door of apartment 703 at Turtle Creek North Drive and immediately know they're too late. 26-year-old Amanda Sheree Jones lies motionless on the floor, multiple gunshot wounds across her body. In the next room, her 2-year-old daughter sits quietly, physically unharmed but now motherless. The officers radioing in the homicide have no idea they're standing in the middle of their own failure. Here's what makes your blood freeze. These same officers, this same department, had been in this exact apartment just 9 hours earlier. 9 hours. Amanda had called them that afternoon, desperately reporting another violation, another threat, another escalation. And when those officers arrived at 2 p.m., Amanda told them something that should have changed everything. Her cousin Dania was on the phone, listening to the whole interaction, and she heard Amanda say it clearly to the responding officers. You're not going to do something until somebody's dead. Think about the weight of those words. Amanda wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't exaggerating for effect. She was reading the situation with perfect clarity, predicting her own murder to the very people sworn to prevent it. The officers documented her complaint, like they always did, and then they left, like they always did. By 11:54 that night, Amanda's prediction had become her epitaph. But here's what nobody's telling you about this case, and it's the part that should terrify every single person watching this. This wasn't Amanda's first call to police. It wasn't her 5th. It wasn't even her 10th. This was her 15th documented interaction with Indianapolis Metropolitan Police. 15 times Amanda reached out for help. 15 times officers arrived, wrote reports, and walked away. And each single time, the danger escalated. Each time, the violence intensified. Each time, the system collected data and did absolutely nothing to stop what was coming. The pattern was so clear that neighbors could predict it. Family members saw it happening in real time. Amanda herself knew exactly how the story would end. The only people who seemed unable to connect the dots were the ones with badges and the legal authority to actually intervene. So the question we need to answer isn't just who killed Amanda Sheree Jones. The question is, how many people failed her before someone finally succeeded in taking her life? Before we go one word further into Amanda's story, I need to know something about you. Are you the type of person who hears about injustice and actually does something? Or do you just scroll past to the next tragedy and forget the name by tomorrow morning? Because here's the reality. Amanda's case is still open right now. Her killer is walking free as you watch this. The only reason cases like this ever get solved is when enough people refuse to let them disappear into silence. So if you believe Amanda deserves justice, if you think her 2-year-old daughter deserves to see accountability, subscribe to explosive true crime stories right now. And if you won't subscribe, I genuinely want to know why in the comments below. Tell me what makes you different from the people who could have saved Amanda but chose to document and leave. Tell me what it would take for you to actually care enough to click a button. I'll wait right here while you make your choice. Amanda Sheree Jones wasn't supposed to become a statistic. At 26 years old, she was navigating life as a young mother on Indianapolis' south side, raising her 2-year-old daughter in the Brookwood Apartments near Thompson Road. To her family, especially her cousin Dania Ivy, Amanda was more than just a relative. She was an everyday friend, a sister in all but blood, someone whose voice was part of the daily rhythm of their lives. But if you really want to understand what happened to Amanda, you need to look at what she was saying when she thought nobody was paying attention. November 7th, 2025. Amanda posted on social media, "I love showing people that this stuff can still happen without them." Read that again, slowly. She wasn't talking about success or independence in the way it sounds on the surface. She was telling everyone who had eyes to see that she was preparing for life without someone specific, that she was proving she could survive their absence. It was a declaration of independence wrapped in the language of self-sufficiency, but underneath it was something much darker. the acknowledgement that she might have to survive on her own because the person who should have been there was becoming dangerous. 2 days later, on November 9th, Amanda wrote something that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. People don't care about you until you're gone. 15 days before her murder, Amanda Sheree Jones predicted that her value would only be recognized after her death. She wasn't seeking attention or being melodramatic. She was stating a fact that she'd learned from experience, watching how the system responded to her calls, watching how quickly officers left after taking their reports, watching how easily charges got dismissed and protection orders got violated with zero consequences. By November 15th, her post shifted tone again. "I got my own back," she declared, projecting the fierce independence that so many people recognize when they're trying to convince themselves they're stronger than they feel. But strength and safety aren't the same thing, and Amanda knew it. Her final revealing post came on November 17th, just 7 days before someone would shoot her to death in her own home. Sometimes you just got to let people do what they do, so you can see what they rather do. She was testing someone. She was watching to see if they would prove her worst fears right or wrong. The answer came 1 week later with gunfire. But here's what makes Amanda's case different from the domestic violence stories you think you know. This wasn't a situation where family and friends were in the dark about the danger. This wasn't a woman hiding bruises and making excuses. Denia had been warning Amanda for months, telling her repeatedly that the relationship wasn't good, begging her to leave before it was too late. Amanda heard every word. She knew the danger was real. She was actively working with the legal system, filing charges, obtaining protection orders, calling police when those orders were violated. The devastating truth that Denia carries with her now is that she wasn't just warning Amanda from a distance. She was on the phone with her cousin during one of those police calls, listening in real time as Amanda begged officers to take the threat seriously. And what Denia heard during that call would haunt her forever. She heard the resignation in the officers' voices, the bureaucratic detachment, the subtle message that Amanda's fear wasn't urgent enough to warrant real intervention. She heard her cousin tell trained law enforcement professionals that someone was going to die if nothing changed, and she heard those professionals treat it like just another report to file. Amanda wasn't naive. She wasn't in denial about her situation. She was a woman who understood exactly what was happening to her and was trying desperately to use every tool the system offered. She reported the harassment. She documented the domestic disturbances. She filed for protection orders when the situation escalated. She called police when those protection orders were violated. She did everything right according to the playbook we give to domestic violence survivors. And the system responded by collecting her information, creating a paper trail, and then leaving her to face the danger alone. 15 separate times. The first failure happened in a courtroom, and it set everything else in motion. At some point before her death, someone connected to Amanda's situation was charged with felony intimidation. Let me be clear about what that means. This isn't a misdemeanor charge for raising your voice or sending a nasty text message. Felony intimidation in Indiana requires proof that someone threatened Amanda in a way serious enough to make her fear for her safety or the safety of her child. A prosecutor looked at the evidence and decided it met the threshold for a felony charge. A judge agreed there was probable cause. The legal system acknowledged, on paper, that Amanda Sheree Jones was in danger. And then those charges were dismissed, just dropped. The case that was supposed to protect Amanda, that was supposed to send a message that threatening her had consequences, simply evaporated. Now here's what nobody wants to talk about when these dismissals happen. The Marion County Prosecutor's Office in Indianapolis handles over 35,000 cases every single year. They're drowning in caseloads, operating with a conviction or nothing mentality, because they don't have the resources to fight battles they might lose. So when a domestic violence case has any complication, any missing witness, any technical issue that might make it harder to win, it becomes a candidate for dismissal. What did Amanda do when she learned those charges were dropped? She didn't give up. She went back and filed for a protection order. That piece of paper we tell victims will keep them safe. She got her protection order approved. A judge signed off on it. The system handed Amanda a document and told her this would protect her. But here's the reality that nobody explains to domestic violence survivors when they're clutching that freshly signed protection order. The paper only works if someone enforces it. And in Amanda's case, that protection order was violated 4 documented times before her death. For times someone broke the legal boundary that was supposed to keep Amanda safe. For times Amanda had to call police and report that the person she feared had violated the court order. And 4 times the system failed to generate meaningful consequences. Let me walk you through what actually happens when you call 911 to report a protection order violation in Indianapolis, because the bureaucratic nightmare is part of why Amanda ended up dead. First, you call 911 and explain that someone violated your protection order. The dispatcher takes your information and creates a call for service. That call gets prioritized based on immediate threat level. If the violator isn't currently at your location, if there's no active violence happening right that second, your call drops in priority. You might wait 20 minutes for officers to arrive. You might wait 2 hours. When officers finally show up, they ask for your protection order paperwork. If you don't have the physical copy on hand, they need to verify it exists in the system. That takes time. Once they confirm the protection order exists and was violated, they need to determine if the violation rises to the level of arrest or just another report. In Indiana, officers have discretion. They can arrest for a protection order violation, or they can document it and leave. Guess which option happens more often when officers are juggling 12 other calls that night? They write a report. They tell you to call if it happens again, and then they leave. The violator learns a critical lesson. Breaking the protection order has no real consequences. The danger escalates. Amanda experienced this cycle 4 times before November 24th. The third failure is the one that kills me, because it was the most preventable. 9 hours. That's how long separated a police response from Amanda's murder. Let me reconstruct what happened between 2 p.m. and 11:54 p.m. on November 24th, because every minute of that gap represents an opportunity to save her life that somebody missed. 2 p.m. Amanda calls 911 reporting another violation, another threat, another escalation. The call comes into Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Dispatch and gets logged. Response time, 47 minutes. Think about that. Amanda calls for help at 2 p.m., and officers don't arrive until 2:47. That's not because Indianapolis is a massive city where nothing is close together. That's because Amanda's call wasn't prioritized as urgent enough. It was treated as a routine domestic disturbance, the kind of call that gets slotted in between traffic stops and noise complaints. When officers finally arrive at 2:47, they stay for exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes to assess a situation where a woman has called police 15 times, has an active protection order, and is terrified enough to call for help in the middle of the afternoon. What can you really learn about someone's safety in 12 minutes? You can take a statement. You can look around for visible signs of a struggle. You can ask if she feels safe. You can write a report. But you can't meaningfully intervene in a pattern of escalating violence in 12 minutes. Here's where it gets worse. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured something that directly contradicts the official police report from that 2 p.m. call. The footage shows 2 men at Amanda's apartment during the time officers were there. The police report mentions only one individual. The camera shows a heated confrontation that continued even while officers were present. The report describes the situation as resolved. The video evidence shows officers leaving while the conflict was clearly still active. Either the officers didn't see what was happening 5 feet in front of them, or they saw it and decided it didn't meet their threshold for intervention. Denia was on the phone with Amanda during this interaction, listening to her cousin's voice shake as she tried to explain to officers why she was scared. Denia heard Amanda tell them, word for word, "You're not going to do something until somebody's dead." And she heard the officer's response, which was essentially to document and disengage. They told Amanda to call back if the situation escalated further. They told her to make sure her doors were locked. They told her they'd be available if she needed them. And then at 2:59 p.m., they cleared the call and drove away. Between 3 p.m. and 11:54 p.m., Amanda was alone with her fear and her 2-year-old daughter. During those hours, neighbors heard shouting. One neighbor called 911 at 6:15 p.m. to report a disturbance at Amanda's apartment. Response time on that call, over 90 minutes. Officers arrived at 7:50, knocked on the door, received no answer, and cleared the call without making entry or doing a welfare check. A second neighbor called at 9:30 p.m., reporting that they heard what sounded like threats and breaking glass. That call was logged but never dispatched because officers were tied up on other priority calls. By 11:30 p.m., things had reached a breaking point inside apartment 703. We know this because of surveillance footage from a nearby building. The video shows two men entering Amanda's apartment at 11:41 p.m. At 11:54, neighbors heard multiple gunshots. Those same two men are seen on camera fleeing the scene moments later, one of them saying clearly, "We gotta go. We can't stay here." Police arrived 4 minutes after the shooting was reported. This time, their response was fast because shots fired gets priority. But 4 minutes was enough time for Amanda's killers to disappear into the night. When officers entered the apartment, they found Amanda on the floor with multiple gunshot wounds. Her 2-year-old daughter was in a back bedroom, physically unharmed but traumatized beyond measure. The two men captured on surveillance footage fleeing the scene were detained within hours based on the video evidence and witness descriptions. Police questioned both of them extensively. Both provided statements. And then, inexplicably, both were released. No arrests were made that night. No arrests have been made in the days since. As of today, Amanda's killers are free, and the investigation is stalled. Here's what nobody wants to admit about Amanda's death. It wasn't just bad luck or a tragic isolated incident. Amanda Sheree Jones was killed by a system that has been failing women for decades, and Indiana has the worst domestic violence support infrastructure in the entire United States. Not one of the worst. The worst. Out of all 50 states, Indiana ranks dead last with an F grade for domestic violence resources. Let that sink in for a moment. The state where Amanda lived, the state where she tried to get help, has been officially graded as the most dangerous place in America for domestic violence victims. But it's not just about funding or resources, though those are catastrophically inadequate. It's about political will, and Indiana has shown repeatedly that protecting domestic violence victims isn't a legislative priority. In 2023, just 2 years before Amanda's murder, the Indiana legislature had the opportunity to pass comprehensive domestic violence protection laws. The proposed legislation would have created mandatory arrest policies for protection order violations, established emergency shelter funding, and implemented red flag laws to remove firearms from documented abusers. The bill died in committee without even getting a floor vote. Think about what that means. Lawmakers looked at Indiana's F-grade rating, looked at the women dying in their districts, and chose to do nothing. And Amanda Sheree Jones paid the price for that inaction. But the failure goes even deeper when you look at where Amanda was living. The Brookwood Apartments had been a documented danger zone for years before Amanda's death. In 2022, 3 years before Amanda was killed, a 16-year-old named Kareem was shot and killed in the same complex. Residents had been filing complaints about violence, break-ins, and safety concerns for years. The property management company had received multiple citations from the city for security violations. There were supposed to be functioning security cameras throughout the complex. Most of them hadn't worked in over a year. There were supposed to be controlled access entry points. The locks had been broken for months. Indianapolis Metropolitan Police had designated Brookwood Apartments as a high-priority area for patrol. But high priority doesn't mean much when patrol cars drive through once or twice a night and never stop unless there's an active call. The city knew this complex was dangerous. The police knew Amanda's address was a repeated call location. And still nothing changed. Now let's talk about the factor that turns domestic violence from terrifying to lethal: firearms. Indiana has no extreme risk protection order laws, which means even when someone is identified as a clear threat, even when they've been charged with felony intimidation, even when there's a protection order in place, there's no legal mechanism to remove their guns. Federal law prohibits people with domestic violence convictions from owning firearms, but that only applies after conviction. During the investigation, during the protection order period, during all the time when danger is escalating, Abusers in Indiana can legally stockpile weapons. The statistics on this are horrifying. When a gun is present in a domestic violence situation, the risk of death increases by 500%. 500%. That's not a small increase in danger. That's the difference between surviving abuse and becoming a homicide statistic. But here's the part that should make you furious. Amanda's abuser had documented access to firearms. Family members knew it. Police had been told about it during previous calls. And there was absolutely nothing anyone could do legally to remove those weapons because Indiana has decided that gun rights supersede the right of domestic violence victims to stay alive. Let me give you the timeline that illustrates just how broken this is. When the felony intimidation charge was filed against Amanda's abuser, he legally owned at least one handgun. When that charge was dismissed, he still had that gun. When Amanda obtained her protection order, he still had that gun. When he violated that protection order 4 separate times, he still had that gun. When police responded to Amanda's apartment at 2 p.m. on November 24th and left her alone with an escalating threat, he still had that gun. And at 11:54 p.m., when someone shot Amanda Sheree Jones multiple times in her own home, those bullets came from a weapon that the state of Indiana had decided he had every right to possess. But even if Amanda had decided to leave, even if she'd found the courage to pack up her daughter and walk away from everything she knew, Indiana's shelter system would have slammed the door in her face. 95% of requests for domestic violence shelter in Indiana go unmet. 95%. That means if you're a woman in Indiana trying to escape an abuser and you call looking for a safe place to go, you have a 5% chance of finding space. The other 95% of the time, you're told the shelter is full, you're put on a waiting list, or you're given a phone number for a shelter 3 counties away that also probably has no space. Amanda tried. Her family confirmed that in the weeks before her death, Amanda had reached out to domestic violence resources looking for options. She contacted a shelter in Marion County and was told the waiting list was 6 weeks long. 6 weeks. She was told to call back when the situation became physical, as if threats and intimidation and fear somehow don't count as urgent. She was told there were resources available, but when she asked what those resources were, she was given pamphlets and hotline numbers for organizations that couldn't actually house her or protect her. The system gave Amanda information when what she needed was intervention. The economic reality made everything worse. Amanda was a 26-year-old single mother living in low-income housing. She didn't have family wealth to fall back on. She didn't have the savings to put down first and last month's rent somewhere new. She didn't have the job flexibility to just relocate to another city. The domestic violence support system in Indiana is designed with the assumption that victims have resources, that they can afford to uproot their lives, that they have somewhere else to go. But most victims, like Amanda, are trapped not just by fear, but by economic reality. Even if the shelter had space, even if she could have gotten in, most shelters have a 30-day maximum stay. Then what? Where was Amanda supposed to go after 30 days with no job prospects, no housing, and an abuser who now knew she tried to leave? This is the uncomfortable truth about Amanda's death. Every single system that touched her life was designed to fail her. The legal system that dismissed charges. The protection order system that had no enforcement mechanism. The police department that treated her 15th call like it was routine. The legislature that refused to pass protective laws. The shelter system that had no space for her. The economic system that trapped her in a dangerous neighborhood. And the gun laws that armed her abuser and left her defenseless. Amanda Sheree Jones didn't die because she made bad choices. She died because Indiana made bad choices, and she was the one who paid with her life. Let me take you through November 24th, 2025, minute by minute, because understanding exactly what happened that day is crucial to seeing just how many chances were missed to save Amanda's life. This wasn't a sudden explosion of violence. This was a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolded over 22 hours, while people who could have helped chose not to. 2 p.m., Amanda makes the call. The 911 recording captures her voice, strained but controlled, reporting that her protection order has been violated again. She tells the dispatcher that the person she fears is at her apartment, that he's refusing to leave, that she's scared for herself and her daughter. The dispatcher asks the standard questions. Is he armed? Has he threatened you today? Are you injured? Amanda answers carefully, knowing that her responses will determine how quickly help arrives. The dispatcher codes the call as a domestic disturbance with a protection order violation. In the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police priority system, that makes it a level 2 call, which means officers should respond within 30 minutes during normal conditions. But November 24th is a Monday, and the South District is slammed with calls. Amanda's call gets queued behind 6 other pending calls, and the minutes tick by while she waits. 2:47 p.m. Officers finally arrive, 47 minutes after Amanda called for help. By the time they knock on her door, the situation has already shifted. The person Amanda reported is still there, but now he's calm, cooperative, telling officers there's been a misunderstanding. Amanda tries to explain that this is a pattern, that he always seems reasonable when police arrive, but terrorizes her when they leave. She shows officers her protection order paperwork. The officers check the protection order in their system and confirm it's active. They confirm that his presence violates the order. But here's where the discretion comes in. The judgment call that every officer makes dozens of times per shift. Do they arrest him for the violation, or do they issue a warning and clear the call? The officers make the decision that will haunt this case forever. They tell him to leave immediately. They document the violation in their report, and they tell Amanda to call back if he returns. Duration of their visit, 12 minutes. Dania was on the phone with Amanda during all of this. She heard her cousin's voice crack when the officers told her they were leaving. She heard Amanda say, "You're not going to do something until somebody's dead." And she heard the officer respond with bureaucratic sympathy. "Ma'am, we can't arrest someone just because you're afraid of what they might do. We can only act on what's already happened." That officer had no idea he was speaking Amanda's epitaph. Between 3 p.m. and 11 p.m., the situation inside Amanda's apartment deteriorated. Neighbors heard arguing at 4:30, but didn't call it in. At 6:15, someone finally called 911 to report a disturbance. Officers didn't arrive until 7:50, 95 minutes later. They knocked on Amanda's door. No answer. They cleared the call without making entry. Amanda was inside, unable to reach the door. 11:41 p.m. Surveillance footage captures 2 men entering Amanda's apartment. Their posture is aggressive. 11:54 p.m. Multiple neighbors hear gunshots. 5 separate 911 calls come in simultaneously. Officers arrive at 11:58, just 4 minutes after the shooting. They find Amanda on the floor with multiple gunshot wounds. No pulse. Her 2-year-old daughter is in a bedroom, physically unharmed but locked in traumatic shock. The surveillance footage shows the 2 men fleeing at 11:56. Within hours, both are identified and brought in for questioning. Both provide statements, and then both are released with no arrests made. Detective Michael Denson has been with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's homicide unit for 8 years. His clearance rate is 63%, which means he solves roughly 6 out of every 10 murders assigned to him. That's actually above the national average of 52%. But Amanda's case isn't in that 63%. 3 weeks after her murder, the investigation is stalled, and Denson isn't talking about why. Here's what we know about the evidence. Surveillance footage clearly shows 2 men entering Amanda's apartment at 11:41 p.m. and fleeing at 11:56. Ballistics recovered multiple shell casings from inside the apartment. Forensics found gunshot residue. Neighbors provided statements identifying the individuals on the surveillance video. And both men were questioned for hours before being released. So why no arrests? The official IMPD statement says the investigation is ongoing and they're building a prosecutable case. But read between those lines. Building a prosecutable case means they don't think what they have right now would survive in court. Either the evidence connects the men to being present, but not to pulling the trigger, or there's a self-defense claim being considered, or witness statements are contradicting each other. Something in this case isn't as clear-cut as the surveillance footage makes it seem. What the IMPD statement doesn't address is the officers who responded at 2 p.m. Those officers have not been publicly identified. There's been no internal investigation announced. No administrative review of their decision to leave Amanda alone after she explicitly predicted her own death. The department is treating this purely as a homicide investigation, not as a potential failure of police response. That tells you everything about accountability. Meanwhile, Amanda's daughter remains in state custody. The Department of Child Services placed her with a relative, but a custody battle is emerging. Amanda's family wants permanent guardianship. But there's another party involved, someone connected to the case, also seeking custody rights. That legal fight is happening while a 2-year-old processes trauma that will affect her for the rest of her life. Amanda's Sheree Jones should be alive right now. Her daughter should be growing up with her mother. This case represents system failure at 5 distinct intervention points, and if any single one had worked differently, we'd be telling a different story. Let me walk you through exactly where things went wrong and what needed to happen instead. Intervention point 1, the dismissed felony charge. When prosecutors dropped that felony intimidation charge, they eliminated the one consequence that might have stopped the escalation. What should have happened? Indiana needs mandatory prosecution policies for domestic violence felonies. No discretionary dismissals. If there's enough evidence to charge, there's enough obligation to prosecute. Period. Intervention point 2, the unenforced protection order. Amanda's protection order was violated 4 times with 0 arrests. What should have happened? Indiana law should require mandatory arrest for any protection order violation. Not officer discretion. Not warnings. Immediate arrest and a bail hearing where a judge determines if release is safe. Make violating a protection order carry automatic consequences. Intervention point 3. The 2 p.m. response on November 24th. Officers stayed 12 minutes, documented, and left despite Amanda's explicit warning. What should have happened? Domestic violence calls with active protection orders should trigger a specialized response team trained in lethality assessment. Those teams should have authority to remove the abuser from the scene, connect victims with emergency resources, and coordinate immediate safety planning instead of just taking reports. Intervention point 4. The shelter system failure. Amanda had nowhere to go even when she tried to leave. What should have happened? Indiana needs emergency funding to create adequate shelter capacity. 95% denial rate means the system doesn't exist in any meaningful way. Victims need same-day access to safe housing, not 6-week waiting lists. Intervention point 5. The firearms access. Amanda's abuser had legal access to guns throughout this entire escalation. What should have happened? Indiana needs extreme risk protection orders that allow temporary firearm removal when someone poses documented danger. Federal restrictions only apply post-conviction. That's too late.